Hello and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where you take a look at the stories being followed in the upcoming edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined today by North Coast Journal's news editor, Thad Greenson. Hey, Thad, thanks for joining me today solo.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dave. Jen is away, unfortunately, so you're stuck with just me today.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing. We miss Jen, we love Jen, but truth is, we're just going to soldier on without her this week.
It's all we can do, and I'll try to be funny in her stead.
Okay, cool. Unfortunately, there's not, it's not a funny topic. What you guys are covering this week on the cover is, of course, the developments that we've got in our community in COVID, plus there's a couple other COVID-related stories. Why don't we just dive right in and tell us a little bit about where we stand this week in our community with COVID?
Yeah, like our community, this is a COVID-heavy issue. So I have a news story just kind of trying to update the kind of a week in review, COVID week in review for the community, and it's not good, as you might have guessed, and as I'm sure our viewers know. So I guess the very short of it is our case numbers just continue to spike really heavily, driven by this highly contagious Delta variant, and we're starting to see some impacts to hospital capacity. St. Joseph Hospital has canceled elective procedures now, non-emergency elective procedures, and is really kind of gearing up for continued surge. As we know, hospitalizations tend to trail, 4 days to a week behind new infections, and so as the rate of our infections keeps going up, every indication is that hospitalizations will follow.
So I did notice over the weekend, I guess Friday or so, there was about 100 cases in a day, and over the weekend it was over 200. And how are we seeing that impact both hospitalizations, ICU, but even also test positivity percentages, which I know is an important indicator?
Yeah, our test positivity rate just continues to surge along with cases. So there's no, there's no flip side to the coin of saying, oh, well, we're just testing more, that's why we have more cases. No, I think I've said on the show before, we had the highest test positivity rate we had at any point in the pandemic last month in July. It was 10.1%, which far outpaced the statewide rate. And in August, that's jumped up to higher than 16%, which is much higher than the national rate of 10%, and nearly 3 times the state rate, which I think is hovering down about 6%. And as I said, hospital capacity is starting to be impacted right now. We're not, our neighbors to the north, Del Norte County, have some of the worst hospitalization rates in the state. And Sutter Coast Hospital up there has actually activated its surge capacity plan, has built surge tents in its parking lot, and is starting to treat patients there. We're not there yet, but certainly officials are worried we're getting there. Dr. Roberta Luskin-Hawk, who is the CEO of St. Joe's, said at a press conference last week, that they are scrambling, trying to find healthcare providers from other areas that they can bring in, either through staffing agencies or through the state. And the unfortunate fact is that COVID is surging everywhere right now, or at least in most communities, and reinforcements are unlikely to come. So, and this, with all this in mind, is why Dr. Hoffman, Ian Hoffman, our health officer, issued the mandatory mask order last week, hoping that it'll move the needle a little bit, and really, hoping that it's a sign to the community to really start taking this seriously. I don't think anybody wants to see additional mitigation measures, but the ones that would follow would be schools not opening up in the fall or in a few weeks when they're slated to, or further business restrictions. So.
Yeah, not good. Let's kind of go from the general to the specific and talk about what your cover story is this week, because it sheds light on how this unfolds for a family in our community.
Yeah, Absolutely, and I guess just in the midst of that pivot, I should say I've been remiss that I haven't mentioned vaccinations yet in this, and everybody is really urging vaccinations. The county released new data on breakthrough cases this week, which really indicates that while breakthrough cases are a thing that's happening here and do make up a not an insignificant chunk of our cases, I think it's about 20% or so, that by far, breakthrough cases are being outpaced by infections of unvaccinated individuals. I think it's like 5 times the number of 4 or 5 times the number of breakthrough cases we're having. So the vaccines remain super effective against not only severe illness, but really infection. Not to say that vaccinated folks will not get infected, but they're much, much less likely to. So brings us to the cover story this week. I interviewed a man, Jonathan Welch, and his wife and mom. And Jonathan was, for lack of a better term, a COVID denier. He's one of these people who really felt like it was kind of like the flu, and that it was mostly a hoax, and there's a lot of political motivations going on, and kind of the warnings and the public health orders and stuff like that, and just really didn't take it very seriously. And when the vaccine became available, thought it was rushed, and thought it was unsafe, and that the vaccine was potentially more dangerous than COVID infection, and so he opted not to get it, really against the urgings of some of his family members and his mom. And I should say Jonathan is a local business owner. He's the owner of the Fence Doctor. He's a fairly well-known guy locally, and has a huge family, has 9 kids. So really in late June, one of his kids came home with a fever, and they did a rapid COVID test and tested positive. And so the next day they went through the OptumServe site and got the entire family tested, and all of them came back positive. So all 11 people in the household. And so the story is really just, talking to them about their experience, both his experience in thinking that, COVID was kind of overblown, but then really their experience with the illness, and then coming out on the back end, their very strong recommendation that people should take this virus very, very seriously and should get vaccinated. The headline of the story is, "I wish I had been vaccinated." And he's really, one of these people that has come out the other side, kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of preaching the gospel of the vaccines and urging everybody he knows to get the shots and to protect themselves and their families.
We know that he and his entire family tested positive. We know that, that he was hospitalized and very sick, on the verge of intubation, and as recently as I think the story sort of describes, still taking oxygen. Can you tell us a little bit about how it played out? I know one really interesting element is he had a concerned family member, and there was a dialogue about his mother, her concerns, and then how that kind of played out, during the time of hospitalization and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so certainly his mother is immunocompromised, is a cancer survivor, and from the outset took the virus very, very seriously, and really, was one of these people who was not just willing to get the vaccine, but was actively seeking out. And so she was talking about kind of her experience of going to clinics to see if they had leftover shots at the end, and she kind of before she was officially eligible and stuff like that, and got vaccinated as soon as she had the opportunity. And during this time, realizing that not only was he not as eager as her, but he really wasn't going to get vaccinated, and just how much she worried about him. But the course of I was really interested to hear their account of just kind of the course of the illness in their family. And so basically they said that after those positive tests, that things were fair. Initially they were all asymptomatic, other than the one kid who had the fever. And then one day, within about an hour of each other, everybody started experiencing symptoms. And in the household, the symptoms ranged from, the full gamut of COVID symptoms, really, from loss of smell, loss of taste, to fever, to diarrhea, nausea, to respiratory issues, coughs, and shortness of breath. And Sarah Welch, Jonathan's wife, said that it was interesting that really the severity of the symptoms went up incrementally with age. And so they had a 2-month-old child who was tested positive, and he was the most mildly symptomatic of the entire family. Their 18-year-old kid was the most symptomatic of all the kids, and then Jonathan, at 43, who's the oldest of them, got the most severe illness. And I think it was around July 7th. So it was about a week or so after infection. Both Jonathan and Sarah got just really, really sick, really short of breath. Sarah had a really just kind of moving explanation of what that felt like, of just not being able to get enough air in her lungs, and kind of that triggering panic attacks, and that, kind of perpetuating the shortness of breath. And so they actually both went to try to get admitted to the hospital. In the hospital initially, St. Joe's said that they ran some tests and gave them some antibiotics, and said that they really needed to go recover at home, that they weren't ill enough to be admitted. And then later on that night, Sarah had bought a pulse oximeter, which, if folks don't know what that is, it's they're available for sale online. They're very cheap. My family got one just in case. It's a little device that you put on your finger, and it measures the oxygen levels in your blood. And it's a really good indicator, if somebody does have COVID, of when they're starting to experience severe illness. And before you start experiencing that real shortness of breath, or some of the other symptoms of acute illness, your blood oxygen level can give you a heads up that you're headed that way. And so an average healthy person has 95 to 100% blood oxygen levels. And Jonathan's that night dipped down to below 60%. And it was a sign of just severe illness. And so they took him back to the hospital. He was admitted immediately and was there for 19 days, including 4 or 5 in intensive care, and was just for several days sounds like just really a hair away from being put on a ventilator and being put on life support, which doctors really consider, a last measure, because most people who are intubated don't recover. And so was really close to death, honestly. And at that point, because of visitation restrictions, family couldn't visit him. They were sending him messages and video and stuff like that. But there was a lot of question about whether he'd make it out the other side. And of course, during this time, Sarah was also, severely ill at home. She was starting to recover, but she was still, feeling very, very poorly. But finally, Jonathan took a turn. His body started accepting oxygen and holding it more, was moved out of the ICU. And I think on the 27th of July, returned home, but is still on supplemental oxygen, and was very straightforward in saying that he doesn't know what his recovery will look like, if he'll have a full recovery, and expects that he's going to be on supplemental oxygen for a long time at this point.
Wow. It's so tragic. So in speaking with him and his family, it sounds like they want to get the word out that, look, we had some reservations, but now we don't. Can you I know you mentioned it, but where do they, what was the thinking behind, how did they explain why they weren't getting vaccinated?
So Jonathan, so first of all, I should say outright that I couldn't interview Jonathan because he's still on oxygen. He gets very winded having a conversation. And so I interviewed him by email, but that's, somewhat restricting. And I wasn't able to get kind of as much direct information from him as I would like. And so he answered, gave me a very short and straightforward answer about his vaccine hesitancy, which was just that he was taught not to take experimental drugs. He felt like this was very much experimental, and so he didn't want to take it. His mom told me that she had given him kind of the whole range of explanations for not wanting to get vaccinated, including a lot of the kind of conspiracy theories that you hear out there that are absolutely not true about, government agencies wanting to steal your DNA, to microchipping, to all of these kind of fringe theories. And she said, she couldn't tell how serious he was being about these, or if he was just kind of being flippant to blow her off. His Facebook page includes not a lot, but a handful of posts about kind of insinuating that the vaccine is more dangerous than the virus itself, including some that had some very erroneous data about the vaccine trials and people who got sick or whatnot during those. So I think it was kind of a combination of those things and this overarching feeling, which Sarah, his wife, said that he had, which is that he really felt like this was the flu and it just wasn't that big a deal, and that if he did get sick, he'd be fine. But like you said, I mean, they have really come out the other end wanting to spare anybody their experience. And so, Jonathan was just kind of unequivocal in saying to the community, go get vaccinated. Whatever side effects you might have from this vaccine, they're going to pale in comparison to if you really get sick, and what COVID can do to you. And Sarah really said the same thing, that vaccine, she wishes her family had been vaccinated. And that, she had really thought that she was healthy, her family was very healthy and active, and they eat well, and that COVID wouldn't hit them this hard, and that she's never been this sick in her life, and it was unlike anything she'd experienced, and she was really afraid that she was going to die, and she wants other members of the community to not experience that.
Thank you for getting their message out. I think it's important for us to get this message out. We'll revisit it, I'm sure, in coming weeks. So thank you on that.
Yeah, I think it's powerful for all of us to hear directly from people who have had these experiences and really get a firsthand account of what one of our neighbors went through.
Yeah. So let's also, one of the other things that you covered, I think Jennifer actually covered it in the Arts and Features beat, is how our community restaurants are dealing with the current surge, we'll call it, in Delta variant COVID. But you're going to speak on her behalf about what her article includes. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what's in the this week's issue on restaurants?
I am. It doesn't have any food descriptions, so I feel like I have a fighting chance of doing it some justice. But Jennifer wrote a column about it kind of melds her firsthand apprehensions of being somebody who loves to eat in restaurants and feeling so conflicted about wanting to support our restaurants, wanting to eat in our restaurants, but then also really having trepidations about whether it's safe. And some interviews that she did with a couple restaurant owners locally. And where she really landed is that, especially if you are unvaccinated, it's just not safe for you or anybody around you for you to be dining out now. You can take out, bring that food home, but as far as sitting down unmasked in a restaurant and eating around other customers who are unmasked and eating, and around wait staff who have to be there all day, that it just doesn't feel safe. And I don't know if Jen touches on this in the column, but I would point out that, if we were back when California was still doing its tiered COVID restrictions, our numbers would be bright purple and everything would be closed right now. I mean, that's just the amount of virus we're seeing circulating in the local community. But it was also, I think, a really interesting part of the column is that she talked to first to Betsy Musick, I think is how you pronounce it, whose family runs the Trinidad Eatery, and then also to Renata Mackless, who runs Renata's Scrapery in Arcata. And both of them were just so conflicted about what to do in this moment in time. And in contrast to when there was the tiered system, there's nobody right now telling restaurants what safety guidelines are and should be, and what they should do. And so they both talked about just being really conflicted about wanting to protect staff, wanting to be there for the regulars, wanting to sustain their business, obviously, but then also being very fearful that it's just not safe for anybody. And so I know Renata said that, they're contemplating whether to pivot back to solely to takeout. Renata's actually had a scare where an employee was exposed to COVID. Turned out that they tested negative, and everybody in Renata's tested negative, but they closed down for a couple days until they could get those test results back and make sure. And that just kind of really had a chilling effect. And they there's some, talk of whether they want to go to a vaccinated only model, or whether the state should mandate a vaccinated only dine-in model. But then that would, much as it has with masks, that would put them back on the front lines of kind of being public health enforcers and having to check vaccine cards at the entryway. And they have a lot of trepidation about doing that too.
Yeah, I mean, for any restaurateur, it's got to be troubling to imagine that that's going to be that they would be an extension of the public health checkpoint system. I think it's like a non-starter for most people. They just don't want to go down that road. Was there any talk of actual closure at all, or other drastic measures of that nature?
Well, I think Renata definitely said that she's contemplating pivoting to takeout only. But yeah, I mean, as you say, we've kind of seen this movie before with restaurants having to enforce mask mandates, and that I think Jen's talked about it on this show before. She's definitely written about it before, but that hasn't gone well. And and some have bristled and stuff, and it seems like vaccination is even a thornier subject than masks. And I think both Betsy and Renata said that the regular customers aren't the issue. They're understanding, they're patient, they try to follow the rules the best they can, but it's the occasional customers or folks from outside the area, even folks from out of state who come from states without mask mandates or with more with less restrictions in place, and some of them take very poorly to being told to put on a mask, and would probably even more so to show a vaccine card.
Yeah, I guess this is another one of those cases where it's to be continued, where we'll just see how this tracks, if there's any kind of slowdown in the escalation of new cases, and if we can kind of get a handle on it before it gets too far down that path.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. Both of them kind of indicated that they would welcome somebody kind of telling them what to do and how to navigate this. They feel kind of rudderless in navigating these waters. And as to your point about case numbers, I guess I would just caution. 2 points on that. One, the first is that no wind is going to come in and change the tide of COVID in our community. It's up to all of us, and we kind of talked about this a little bit in an editorial this week. But the state is not going to shut Humboldt County down, at least not in the foreseeable future again. And so really it comes to us, and it comes to us following, the public health guidelines that officials keep talking about. It's, they're not that complicated. Even if folks, don't want to get vaccinated, then they really need to be especially mindful of the other provisions, which is, mask up when you're around other people, don't mix households, don't have gatherings, those very basic tenets. And the more we do that, that's what's going to bring these case numbers down. But it's there's no magic bullet that's going to come save us. And to that note, I mean, I guess the other point is just that, these epidemiological curves are somewhat predictable, and at this point, ours is just escalating. And so there's no reason to believe. I guess our mask mandate went into effect 4 or 5 days ago, and presumably in a week or so that might start, bending the curve a little bit. But Dr. Hoffman has been pretty clear that if everybody is 100% compliant with the mask mandate, he thinks that it might cause a 50% reduction in cases. But realistically, he's hoping for a 15 to 25% reduction in cases with the mask mandate. And that still leaves us with a whole lot of COVID in the community. So it's going to be a while before these numbers start trending down in a way that feels manageable, unfortunately.
Yeah. Speaking of unfortunate, I guess we also have just a couple minutes left. We are also in our community here experiencing fires right at the edges of our region that are, if the winds shift, it'll impact us in a big way. I know you firsthand experience recently. If you don't mind, real briefly, tell us a little bit about what you've seen and heard about the fires impacting our region here.
Yeah, so I spent this morning actually out at the fire base camp for the Monument Fire, touring it and getting a briefing with North Coast Congressman Jared Huffman, who's in town for a number of events. But the very short of the Monument Fire is it seems like they have a pretty good handle on it now. The response initially was really plagued by a lack of resources, is what I learned today, and just not too much fire in California and really the Western United States in general, and just not enough on the ground resources to get that thing under control quickly. So they have really prioritized defending communities and structures, and they've done that kind of at the expense of letting the fire spread into uninhabited areas to a bit. Currently the weather is holding well. It's there isn't much wind, which is why we're kind of under this blanket of smoke right now, which is not fun for us. But just like we need air to breathe, fire needs air to breathe, and so a blanket of smoke hovering over the fire has really kind of kept it under control for the last couple days, and allowed crews to really get those containment lines going and stuff like that. And so they're optimistic that they're going to be able to protect Burnt Ranch and Junction City, which are kind of on the two flanks of the fire, the western and eastern edge. But the unfortunate truth is that thing is going to be probably burning for a long time, possibly until we get some heavy rain. So.
Yeah, not good. I know that that's a huge area affected, and I think, our thoughts go out to all the folks that are impacted. And I guess let's just, again, not that hope really does much here, but let's hope the weather cooperates and maybe, mitigates to a certain extent how it's going to impact everybody here.
An August downpour would just be delightful.
Yeah, exactly. Well, right on. We're just about out of time this week. Thad, thanks so much for all this COVID information, fire information. Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe Jennifer's humor will be welcome when she comes back around. But for now, this was great. You did a great job. I appreciate you.
All right. Thanks, David. Take care.
North Coast Journal is available on newsstands now. Pick one up. Stay informed. It's also available online, so real easy to get to. Everybody out there, stay safe and take care until next week.